August 23rd, 2010. London, England. The nude decomposed body of 31-year-old Gareth Williams, a junior analyst who had been working with MI6, is found inside a padlocked holdall bag in the bathtub of his flat. While his cause of death cannot be determined, there are differing opinions about whether Gareth could have locked himself in the bag on his own and suffocated, or if he was murdered by an unknown third party. A number of different theories are pushed forward, including Gareth being killed by Russian agents or becoming the victim of a sex game gone wrong, but there are no conclusive answers about how he died. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and on this episode, we're going to be traveling to the United Kingdom to explore what has become one of the most bizarre mysteries of the 21st century, the unexplained 2010 death of Gareth Williams. As you probably know, The Trail Went Cold will be appearing on Podcast Row at CrimeCon UK in London this coming weekend, and per tradition, whenever I attend one of these podcasting events, I always like to cover a case from the host city that very same week. And I think it's safe to say that since I launched this podcast, I probably received more requests to cover the Gareth Williams case than any other mystery from London. After working many years at the government communications headquarters, Gareth went on secondment to work as a junior analyst at the Secret Intelligence Service, aka MI6. When Gareth missed an entire week of work, a welfare check was performed of his flat by the Metropolitan Police, and they would discover Gareth's body inside a holdall bag, which had been placed in his bathtub and had a padlock on the outside. Due to the level of decomposition, it was estimated that Gareth had been dead for at least 7 days before he was found, and his exact cause of death could not be determined. Naturally, once the media learned that Gareth worked for MI6, the reporting on this story would be heavily sensationalized, and it is often referred to as the spy in the bag mystery, even though Gareth was technically not a spy. There's always been speculation that Gareth's job played a role in his death, as uncorroborated rumors have circulated that he was murdered by Russian agents, but the sensationalized nature of the reporting would also extend to Gareth's personal life. Gareth was known for being a very private person, but information about his background would be uncovered, which caused speculation that his death might have been some sort of sex game gone wrong. Even though an inquest was held, in which the coroner concluded that there was likely an unknown third party present when Gareth died, police have since stated that there is no evidence to indicate that anyone else was involved, and they are inclined to believe that Gareth climbed into the bag on his own accord and suffocated when he was unable to get out. The circumstances of this case are so unusual that I do believe there is compelling evidence which points towards both sides, so we're going to try and figure out what actually happened on today's episode. However, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has nearly 80 exclusive bonus episodes in our archives, which are not available on a regular feed. So with all that out of the way, let us now delve into the unexplained death of Gareth Williams. Our story begins in the United Kingdom in 2010, and our central figure is 31-year-old Gareth Williams. Gareth was born to parents Ian and Ellen Williams in the village of Valley, located on the west coast of the Isle of Anglesey in North Wales, and he also had a younger sister named Carrie. Gareth was known for being an incredibly bright child with a passion for mathematics, and at the age of 16, while still attending secondary school, he would make special trips to Bangor University in order to study for a part-time mathematics degree. After achieving this, Gareth eventually graduated from the university with a first-class degree before he relocated to England to work on a PhD in computer science at the University of Manchester. While there, Gareth caught the attention of Government Communications Headquarters, aka GCHQ, an intelligence and security organization responsible for providing signals intelligence and information assurance to the government and armed forces of the United Kingdom. GCHQ felt that Gareth had the potential to be a valuable asset to their organization and agreed to sponsor him while he worked on a postgraduate certificate in advanced mathematics at St. Catherine's College in Cambridge. In 2001, Gareth failed an exam and decided to drop out of the course, but GCHQ offered him a job as a cryptologist, where his duties would include intercepting coded communications on the radio and the internet and attempting to break them. He would work at their headquarters, a round-shaped structure nicknamed the Donut, located in the suburbs of Cheltenham, and he rented out a room at a residence in the village of Pressbury. According to his landlady, Jennifer Elliott, Gareth was the perfect tenant who never caused any trouble, and he was known for being a polite, mild-mannered, but very private man who appeared to be a bit of a loner that never engaged in much social interaction. Gareth was also an avid cyclist who liked to compete in races and was a member of numerous cycling clubs, and once again, his fellow cyclists believed he was a very nice but quiet person who wasn't the sort of individual who liked to hang out at the pub following a race. Gareth would spend around 8 years working for GCHQ in Cheltenham, but during the summer of 2009, he was sent on a 3-year secondment to the Secret Intelligence Service, more commonly known as SIS or MI6. Gareth relocated to London, where he moved into the top-floor flat of a townhouse on Alderney Street in Pimlico, an area which was known for being home to a number of wealthy residents, and was located only a half-mile away from MI6 headquarters at Vauxhall Cross. Gareth lived in London and worked at the MI6 building for 1 year, but due to the top-secret nature of his job, he did not tell his family or friends what exactly he did. During the summer of 2010, he made the decision to cut his 3-year secondment short and requested to return to Cheltenham to work at GCHQ again. According to those who knew him, Gareth disliked the fact that MI6 and GCHQ had drastically different work cultures, as MI6 was populated by more social, extroverted individuals who loved the big city life, whereas Gareth preferred to live near the countryside again. At one point, Gareth phoned his former landlady, Jennifer Elliott, who agreed to allow him to move back into his old room in Pressbury, and he was scheduled to leave London and return there on September the 3rd, before he resumed his duties at GCHQ. As one of his final assignments for MI6, Gareth traveled to the United States to attend DEF CON, an annual convention for hackers held in Las Vegas every year. The purpose of Gareth's assignment is unclear, but after it was completed, he took some leave and remained in Las Vegas for a few days before he returned to London on August the 11th. Gareth was scheduled to go back to work at the MI6 building on Monday, August the 16th, but he never did, and he would soon find himself embroiled in an unsolved mystery. The following Monday, August the 23rd, GCHQ received a call at around 11 a.m. from Gareth's sister, Carrie, who had not heard from him since they spoke on the phone following his return to London 12 days earlier. Since Carrie was unable to reach Gareth, she'd become concerned, but it turned out he had not shown up for work for an entire week and never contacted anyone at MI6 or GCHQ. Later that day, at 4:30 p.m., one of Gareth's managers finally called the 999 emergency number and asked the Metropolitan Police to perform a welfare check at his flat. 10 minutes later, 2 officers arrived at the townhouse in Pimlico and were led into Gareth's flat, but they immediately noticed that the heating had been turned all the way up, even though it was late August and the weather was hot, and there was also a strange odor emanating from the bedroom's in-suite bathroom, which had its door closed. When the police entered the bathroom and turned on the lights, they immediately detected the odor from the bathtub where the shower screen was closed. It wasn't long before they discovered a red, vinyl, 32 by 19-inch North Face brand holdall bag in the bathtub, which had a padlock on the zippers. Since the foul smell was emanating from the bag and it was leaking red fluids, it seemed apparent that a body might be inside. Indeed, when police cut through the side of the bag, they discovered Gareth's nude, decomposing body, which was curled in a fetal position, and the key to the padlock would later be found underneath his body. Some of the original reporting from the media about Gareth's death stated that he had been stabbed several times and classified him as the victim of a homicide, but of course, this turned out not to be true, as Gareth's exact cause of death could not be determined. An autopsy revealed there were no serious injuries or bruises on Gareth's body, aside from some small abrasions on the tips of his elbows, which may have been caused by him moving his arms inside the bag during a possible attempt to escape. The interior of the bag did contain some tiny scratches, which could have been caused by the key from the padlock, which was found underneath Gareth's body. There were no signs of Gareth having been involved in a struggle, and toxicology reports showed that there were no drugs, alcohol, or detectable poisons in his system. None of Gareth's fingerprints could be found on the exterior of the holdall bag, as well as the zipper and the padlock, and no gloves were in the bag either. And since his prints were also not found on the rim of the bathtub or the tiled bathroom walls, it seems like it would have been very difficult, if not outright impossible, for Gareth to climb into the bag and lock himself inside without the involvement of a third party. The authorities immediately categorized Gareth's death as, quote-unquote, suspicious and unexplained, but due to the top-secret nature of his job, the heads of the Metropolitan Police and MI6 were forced to have a meeting in order to determine who should lead the investigation. Since the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command, aka SO15, had the necessary security clearance to review certain materials, they would have to function as the go-between with the two organizations. This meant that SO15 would need to conduct the interviews with employees from MI6, and then provide anonymized notes about the interviews to the Metropolitan Police's Homicide and Major Crime Command, aka SCO1. While few specific details about Gareth's work with MI6 have ever been released publicly, it has been reported that he, quote-unquote, designed practical applications for emerging technologies and was deemed to be, quote-unquote, low risk. A search of Gareth's flat turned up no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen, as Gareth's laptop, 2 cell phones, and some SIM cards were lying out in the open. It would later turn out that one of the phones had been backed up to his laptop at 11:54 p.m. on August the 15th, possibly overwriting previously stored data and call or chat records, and the phone was reset to factory settings. The laptop was then used to browse the internet for the next 90 minutes, and its last activity was visiting a website for a cycling club near Cheltenham at 1:03 a.m. on August the 16th. It was established that Gareth had traveled to London from Las Vegas on August the 11th, so investigators searched through CCTV footage in an attempt to track his movements in the days prior to his death. CCTV would capture Gareth entering Holland Park Tube Station at around 3 p.m. on August the 14th, and going into Harrods department store in Knightsbridge and walking towards Sloane Street between 2 and 2:30 p.m. on the 15th. The last CCTV footage of Gareth was filmed at 3 p.m. that afternoon and showed him walking down Alderney Street towards his flat while carrying 2 bags. If Gareth was the one who used his laptop to browse the internet several hours later, then that seemed to place his death sometime after 1:03 a.m. on August the 16th, as he did not show up for work as scheduled later that morning, and there were no other sightings of Gareth or communications from him until his body was discovered 1 week later. For the most part, Gareth's flat was meticulously clean, but traces of his semen were found on the bathroom floor, which seemed to suggest that he may have experienced some sort of sexual release before he wound up in the bag. Now, there's been a lot of contradictory information out there about the DNA evidence in this case, and whether any DNA or fingerprints belonging to an outside party could be found in the flat. It's been reported that inconclusive fragments of DNA components from at least 2 contributors besides Gareth were found on the holdall bag. In addition, there were about 10 to 15 traces of DNA spread throughout the flat where it was not possible to get a full profile from it. At one point, DNA belonging to an unknown party was found on Gareth's left hand, but it turned out to be the result of contamination from one of the forensic scientists. Overall, it sounds like all the complete DNA profiles and fingerprints which were found in the flat wound up being identified and eliminated as having any connection to Gareth's death. It would be 1 month before Gareth's body was released to his family, and on September the 26th, he was given a private funeral service which was attended by numerous individuals, including MI6 Chief Sir John Sowers, who spoke at the service and stated, quote, "Gareth was a hugely talented person and very modest as well. He did really valuable work with us in the cause of national security," end quote. Gareth was subsequently buried at Enniswan Cemetery in his home village of Bally. During the early stages of the investigation, police put a lot of emphasis on an unidentified Mediterranean couple who appeared to be in their 20s or early 30s and had supposedly been seen visiting the townhouse in the months prior to Gareth's death. Composite sketches of this couple were circulated throughout the media, but they were eventually identified and tracked down and ruled out as having any connection to the case. In December of 2010, the Metropolitan Police would release further details about the case to the public, but many of these details were related to Gareth's personal life and would be heavily sensationalized by the British tabloids. For starters, it was revealed that one of the cell phones found in Gareth's flat had been used to browse bondage websites, though he only visited these sites intermittently. There was nothing to indicate that Gareth had an obsession with bondage, and even though some media sources erroneously reported that bondage equipment had been found in his flat, this would later be proven to be false, and no pornography was found in the flat either. However, investigators did confirm that they found a number of boxes and bags containing about 20,000 pounds worth of what they described as quote-unquote high-end women's clothing, such as designer dresses. In addition, several pairs of women's shoes and boots, along with women's wigs and some makeup, were found in the flat. It turned out that 2 days before his death, Gareth had visited a theater featuring a cabaret act with drag artist Johnny Woo, and he also purchased tickets for a pair of drag shows at the Vauxhall Tavern, which were scheduled to take place after he died. An additional cell phone belonging to Gareth was found inside his work locker at MI6, and it featured a video he had shot of himself dancing nude while wearing nothing but a pair of leather boots, before he bent over a chair and wiggled his rear end in front of the camera. Naturally, this caused many of the British tabloids to publish unfounded speculation that Gareth liked to dress in women's clothing, though most of the clothing found in his flat was unworn and still in its original packaging. Most of the women's wigs were also still in their packaging, though a bright red wig had been hanging from the back of a chair when police first entered the flat. One childhood friend of Gareth's named Sean Lloyd Jones expressed her belief that he may have been intending to give some of this clothing and footwear as gifts to her and his sister Carrie, as most of the clothing was too small for Gareth and the women's shoes he had did match Carrie's shoe size. However, receipts showed that Gareth had been gradually buying this clothing over the course of the previous 2 years, and one shop assistant who sold some clothing to Gareth claimed he had told them they were for his girlfriend, even though there was no indication that Gareth had one. It also turned out that Gareth had taken and passed 2 fashion design courses at Central St. Martin's College without telling anyone at MI6, so this could have provided an alternate explanation for his decision to purchase all this women's clothing. One witness told investigators that he had chatted with Gareth at a gay bar called the Barcode 3 months prior to his death, but since no one ever reported having seen Gareth in the company of any male or female sexual partners, it was never confirmed that he was gay. Regardless, rumors still started to circulate that Gareth's death may have been the result of a sex game gone wrong. One theory which got pushed forward is that Gareth had a fetish for claustrophilia, which was a desire to be confined in closed spaces, and this could have compelled him to lock himself into the holdall bag on his own, but he wound up suffocating when he couldn't get out. While there was no evidence that Gareth had ever visited any websites about claustrophilia, Jennifer Elliott, Gareth's former landlady in Pressbury, reported that there had been an incident in 2007 when she and her husband were woken up in the middle of the night by Gareth crying out for help. When they went into Gareth's room, they discovered him lying on his bed dressed only in boxer shorts with both of his hands tied to the bedposts. After they cut Gareth free, he told them that he had tied himself up like that to see if he could get free, but called for help when he realized he was unable to do so. Regardless, the Elliots believed that there might have been a sexual element to Gareth's actions. In March of 2012, a coroner's inquest was held in an attempt to determine the circumstances of how Gareth died. A narrative verdict would be delivered by Dr. Fiona Wilcox, Her Majesty's Senior Coroner for Inner West London, who stated that she believed Gareth's death was, quote-unquote, unnatural and likely to have been criminally meditated. And she was, quote-unquote, satisfied that on the balance of probabilities that Gareth was killed unlawfully. Even though there was no data found on Gareth's laptop or cell phones to indicate that he had been in contact with anyone suspicious prior to his death, Dr. Wilcox believed that at the very least, a third party had to have been present at the time Gareth died. One of the strongest pieces of evidence which pointed towards outside involvement was the fact that the heating in Gareth's flat had been turned all the way up, even though it was August. It was theorized that an outside party may have done this in order to speed up the decomposition on Gareth's body and destroy potential evidence. While Gareth's exact cause of death could not be determined, and there were no signs that he had been smothered or asphyxiated, a pathologist testified that after being in the holdall bag for only 2 or 3 minutes, Gareth likely would have been overcome by hypercapnia, which causes elevated carbon dioxide levels in the blood. It was unclear if Gareth was still alive when he entered the bag, but a pathologist testified that he believed this was more likely. He felt it would have been difficult for someone to arrange a dead body into the fetal position Gareth was found in, though it would not have been impossible if rigor mortis had not yet set in. 2 experts testified that it would have been extremely difficult for Gareth, who was 5'8" and 130 pounds, to climb into the holdall and padlock himself inside without assistance. Together, they claimed they made a combined total of 400 attempts to lock themselves into a similar-sized bag, but were unable to do so successfully. One of these experts was Peter Falding, who specialized in rescuing people from confined spaces, and stated, quote, "I couldn't say it's impossible, but I think even Houdini would have struggled with this one," end quote. Dr. Wilcox used the inquest as an opportunity to direct criticism towards MI6 for waiting an entire week to ask the police to perform a welfare check on Gareth, even though he had missed several scheduled shifts at work. She feared that the delay with the discovery of Gareth's body may have led to the loss of important forensic evidence. Wilcox was also critical of SO15, who failed to inform SCO1 about some key pieces of evidence. As you recall, due to them holding the necessary security clearance, SO15 were in charge of performing the investigation into MI6. They wound up finding 9 memory sticks inside Gareth's locker at the MI6 building, as well as another locked holdall bag underneath his desk. While the contents of these memory sticks and the holdall have never been revealed publicly and may not even have any significance, SO15 failed to inform the senior investigating officer from SCO1 about these items for nearly 2 years, and they were not brought up until late in the inquest. Dr. Wilcox also believed that the rampant sensationalism from the media may have hampered the investigation. She rejected the idea of suicide or Gareth's death being the result of autoerotic asphyxiation, and believed that Gareth's interest in bondage websites and women's clothing had no relevance to his death. Indeed, Gareth's family were quite upset by the leaking of so many details from his private life and described it as a government quote-unquote dirty tricks campaign and an attempt at media manipulation. While Wilcox theorized that another party placed Gareth inside the duffel bag while he was alive before padlocking it and concluded there was likely criminal involvement, she still felt there was insufficient evidence for a verdict of unlawful killing and instead delivered an open verdict. Wilcox stated, quote, "It is unlikely this death will ever be satisfactorily explained. Most of the fundamental questions in relation to how Gareth died remain unanswered," end quote. While Wilcox's verdict compelled the Metropolitan Police to launch an all-new investigation which lasted for a year and a half, and allowed their officers to have unprecedented access to MI6 staff. However, in November of 2013, they publicly announced that after exploring new leads and performing a re-examination of all the evidence, they now believe the most probable scenario was that Gareth died alone after accidentally locking himself inside the bag, though they still cannot conclusively determine his exact cause of death. Even though two experts had testified at the coroner's inquest that it would have been extraordinarily difficult for Gareth to lock himself in the bag on his own, a retired Royal Artillery Sergeant named Jim Featherstonehaugh filmed the video of his 16-year-old daughter Izzy climbing into an identical holdall bag to demonstrate that this act was physically possible. After entering the bag, Izzy drew her legs up to her body and managed to draw the two zipper pulls together, which opened up a small gap which allowed Izzy to protrude her hands out of the bag and padlock the zippers together. Izzy then stretched her body out, which allowed the zippers to completely close, and she wound up being locked inside the bag with the key to the padlock in her possession. However, the key differences were that Izzy was 3 inches shorter than Gareth, and this demonstration was performed while the holdall was in the middle of the room rather than inside a bathtub. There was also some question about whether Gareth would have been able to seal himself into the bag in this fashion without leaving any DNA or fingerprints behind. In September of 2015, there would be a new development in the story when Boris Karpichkov, a former KGB agent who had defected from Russia to Britain and lived in Pimlico, not far from Gareth's former flat, told the press that Gareth had been murdered by Russian agents. Karpichkov claimed that intelligence sources from Moscow had informed him that the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation, aka the SVR, had attempted to blackmail Gareth into becoming a double agent by threatening to reveal incriminating details about his private life and out him as being gay. Gareth refused to go along with this, and he also told the SVR that he knew the identity of a Russian spy inside GCHQ, as he believed this person had provided the SVR with all the intimate details of his private life. After hearing this, the SVR determined that they had no choice but to eliminate Gareth in order to protect their spy, so they proceeded to assassinate him by placing an untraceable poison into his ear using a needleless syringe, and then locked his body inside the holdall bag. An SVR cleanup team then entered Gareth's flat through a skylight and removed all incriminating evidence that pointed towards them. Karpichkov claimed that he noticed some Russian diplomat cars in Pimlico in the days leading up to Gareth's death, and while Karpichkov initially assumed they were performing surveillance on him, he said he never saw these cars again after Gareth's body was found. In 2017, a pair of anonymous senior British police sources told BuzzFeed News that some of Gareth's work with MI6 was focused on Russia, with one of them confirming reports that he had been working with the United States and helping the National Security Agency trace international money laundering routes used by organized crime groups, including mafia cells based in Moscow. But no evidence has ever been found to indicate Gareth was murdered by Russian agents, and none of Karpichkov's allegations have ever been substantiated. In February of 2021, the Metropolitan Police decided to perform a new forensic review of the evidence in Gareth's case, and a number of exhibits would be resubmitted to a forensic laboratory. There was hope that recent advances in DNA technology would allow scientists to obtain full DNA profiles from some of the unidentified DNA fragments found in Gareth's flat. This forensic review would last around 33 months before the results were delivered to the Metropolitan Police, and in February of 2024, they publicly announced that no new evidence pointing towards a third party had been found. As an example, one exhibit that was retested was a green towel found in a kitchen cupboard, which was ordinarily hung up in the bathroom, but this new testing showed that the only DNA present on the towel actually belonged to Gareth. These results continue to affirm the Metropolitan Police's belief that Gareth was alone when he died, and the senior investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Neil John, told the media, quote, "We have informed Gareth's family of the outcome, and our thoughts remain with them," end quote. In spite of this, there are still many people who believe that there was outside involvement in Gareth's death, and after 14 years, the case continues to remain shrouded in controversy. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. So it's not hard to imagine why this has become one of the most heavily discussed mysteries of the modern era, as even though it took place in the United Kingdom, I know that many true crime followers in North America are familiar with it. Needless to say, I don't think you're going to find too many other cases in which a victim was found inside a large bag inside their own place of residence, and even though it was padlocked, there is still ambiguity about whether the victim could have locked themselves in the bag on their own. The death of Gareth Williams has been rife with sensationalistic reporting, which isn't too surprising given that it involves the British tabloids, who are notorious for this type of stuff. I previously mentioned that this case is often referred to as the spy in the bag mystery, and many sources out there do refer to Gareth as a spy, and almost make him sound like he was the second coming of James Bond. But to recap, Gareth spent around 8 years working as a cryptologist at GCHQ in Cheltenham, which mostly involves sitting behind a desk and attempting to break coded communications. He was then sent on a 3-year secondment to MI6 in London, but his official job was a junior analyst. Granted, the full details of Gareth's duties have never been released publicly, and he did make some overseas trips to the United States, but let's not forget that Gareth had elected to end his secondment 2 years early and had plans to move back to Cheltenham and return to his old position at GCHQ only a few weeks after he died. I've always taken this as a sign that MI6 did not have long-term plans for Gareth, or that he would be performing any top-secret missions as a spy. Yes, we have allegations that he was murdered by Russian agents, which I'll be discussing later on, but I think the fact that Gareth worked at MI6 has caused certain details of his life to be greatly exaggerated, and I'm really not sure what he could have been involved with that would have compelled someone to assassinate him. Of course, the details of Gareth's private life have also been heavily sensationalized, and there has been rampant speculation that it played a role in his death, and that he was the victim of some sort of sex game gone wrong. Let's just examine how certain details were embellished. Since Gareth had previously spent some time browsing websites related to bondage, it's automatically assumed that he was heavily involved in it, even though there was no bondage equipment or pornography found in his flat. Of course, Gareth did have a lot of women's clothing and shoes in his flat, and we know he had an interest attending drag shows, but this automatically led to the tabloids referring to him as a cross-dresser, even though there was no evidence that Gareth had ever dressed in women's clothing. Many sources out there refer to Gareth as gay, and while that could be true, it's never been officially confirmed, as this assumption was mostly based on the fact that a witness claimed he once spoke to Gareth in a gay bar. We have no idea if any of this stuff has relevance to Gareth's death, but the media jumped all over it, and this proved to be very hurtful for his family. As far as I can tell, I don't believe anyone from his immediate family has spoken to the press in 14 years, as it looks like they've delivered most of their public statements through an attorney. Now, even though I've received requests to cover this case for a long time, one of the main reasons I decided to tackle it now is because of the Metropolitan Police's announcement from earlier this year about the completion of their new forensic review. In fact, some British media outlets published headlines stating that this mystery had been solved, which is not quite accurate. All the police said was that this new forensic review failed to turn up any new DNA evidence that proved there was a third party involved in Gareth's death, which is why they are still inclined to believe that he locked himself into the holdall bag on his own. But that conclusion has never been definitively proven either, and it does not mean that there isn't someone out there who might know the truth about what happened. This doesn't necessarily mean that Gareth was the target of a premeditated murder, but there still could have been somebody else present when Gareth went inside the bag, and this person left him there to die when something went horribly wrong. Of course, the big issue is that if Gareth really did lock himself inside the bag and there were no other witnesses present, there's no way to definitively prove this, so his loved ones can never receive a conclusive resolution and will always be left wondering what happened. No matter which way you look at it, I still think there are enough unanswered questions to prevent me from thinking beyond a shadow of a doubt that Gareth alone was responsible for his own death. The only specific foul play theory which has been pushed forward was provided by ex-KGB defector Boris Karpichkov, who claimed that Gareth was killed by the SVR, who were planning to turn Gareth into a double agent by blackmailing him about his private life. But Gareth allegedly signed his own death warrant when he revealed that he knew the identity of a Russian spy inside GCHQ. Of course, that's not to say that Russian assassinations have never occurred on British soil. In November of 2006, less than 4 years before Gareth's death, a Russian defector and former Federal Security Service officer named Alexander Litvinenko died after a 3-week stay in a London hospital after he suddenly fell ill when he was covertly poisoned with a radioactive substance called polonium-210. A former KGB bodyguard would be accused of Litvinenko's assassination, which was possibly performed under the orders of President Vladimir Putin himself, but Russia has always refused to extradite him to the UK to face murder charges. I know there's been speculation that something similar may have happened to Gareth, but you have to ask yourself this question. If anyone from either Russia or Britain wanted to assassinate Gareth, wouldn't there be a much simpler, less attention-grabbing way to do so than locking him inside a holdall bag and placing it in a bathtub? I know that Boris Karpichkov tried to say that Gareth was killed when an untraceable poison was placed into his ear using a needleless syringe, but if such a poison existed, why go to the trouble of putting his body in the bag? Some have argued that Gareth's killers uncovered intimate details about his private life and his secret fetishes, and may have dreamed up a scenario of having him found naked inside a locked bag so that everyone would assume he was the victim of a sex game gone wrong. But that sounds overly complicated, and let's not forget that one detail about Gareth's personal life, which has been confirmed, is that he was an avid cyclist. Wouldn't it be a lot simpler to run him down with a vehicle while he's riding his bike, thereby making his death look like a routine hit and run? If Gareth had been killed in a manner like that, his death would likely be forgotten about today, but creating this whole spy in the bag mystery has pretty much ensured that this case will be debated until the end of time. If this was a professional hit, the best explanation I can think of for Gareth being found in this fashion is that the responsible party may have placed his body inside the bag in hopes of smuggling it out of the flat and disposing of it somewhere, but then they discovered that it was just too heavy to carry. So in response, they decided to leave the bag in the bathtub, clean up the crime scene, and then turn up the heating in hopes that the temperatures would speed up decomposition and destroy potential forensic evidence. Of course, if you're a conspiracy theorist and believe that Gareth's death was somehow related to his work, you could assume that all the press coverage about his private life and so-called dirty secrets could have been a form of media manipulation by MI6, or as his family referred to it, a government dirty tricks campaign. If the people in power felt that digging too deeply into the circumstances of Gareth's death could compromise national security, the focus on Gareth's private life could have been an act of intentional misdirection in order to cover up the truth. One of the more outrageous theories about Gareth's death was published in August of 2015 by the Sunday Sun tabloid, who alleged that he may have been killed because he had obtained a secret diary containing sensitive information about Bill Clinton. But of course, they said they received this information from a quote-unquote anonymous intelligence source, and that probably explains why this theory has never gained much traction. All that being said, even if you are skeptical of the idea that Gareth was the victim of a professional assassination, you have to acknowledge that the circumstances leading up to the discovery of his body are pretty sketchy. In particular, it's extremely odd that Gareth would not show up for work at MI6 for an entire week without them bothering to check on him. It's been reported that Gareth was scheduled to attend at least 3 meetings that week, and it sounds like MI6 did not follow their usual protocols whenever an employee is absent without explanation. I know that certain things are unclear since MI6 did not want to release too many details about Gareth's work, but he did travel to Las Vegas to attend DEF CON and returned to London on Wednesday, August the 11th. He spent the next few days on leave, was captured on CCTV running various errands on the 14th and 15th, and was scheduled to return to work on Monday, August the 16th. But Gareth never showed up or attempted to contact any of his co-workers for an entire week, but no action was taken until Gareth's sister, Carrie, called GCHQ at 11:30 a.m. on Monday, August the 23rd, to express her concern about being unable to contact her brother. Yet for reasons unknown, they waited another 5 hours before asking the police to perform a welfare check at his flat. And if the situation wasn't bizarre enough, MI6 called the 999 emergency number, even though you would think that a top-secret government intelligence service would attempt to handle an issue like this internally before they involved the police. After all, One of the major obstacles in the investigation was the fact that many of the police investigators did not have the necessary security clearance to review classified materials and interview MI6 employees, so this provided a needless complication. I'm sure MI6 would have had the resources to perform a welfare check on their own, particularly when you consider that Gareth's flat was only a half-mile away from their headquarters. I will give them the benefit of the doubt that since Gareth had one foot out the door and was going to be returning to Cheltenham within the next few weeks, watching over him may not have been a priority. But while some workplaces might cut departing employees some slack over frequent absenteeism, it really shouldn't work like that with an organization like MI6. If you believe MI6 was involved in Gareth's death, you could assume that they were putting off the discovery of his body for as long as possible until his sister started asking questions. They may have thought that arranging for the Metropolitan Police to find him would give them plausible deniability. Another strange detail is that 9 memory sticks were found inside Gareth's work locker, but SEO1 were not informed about them for nearly 2 years. MI6 is one workplace in which they would not tolerate their employees bringing their own memory sticks into the building, since there's always a risk they could use them to smuggle out top-secret information. As far as I know, there's no evidence that Gareth was doing this, and I'm guessing there was nothing of value found on the sticks. But the fact that these weren't mentioned until late into the coroner's inquest shows a troubling lack of transparency and demonstrates the issues and red tape involved with a civilian law enforcement agency trying to investigate the death of a victim with a top-secret security clearance. Now, it's estimated that Gareth's death took place sometime during the early morning hours of August the 16th, as his last known activity was visiting a cycling website on his laptop at 1:03 a.m. And we also know that shortly before this, Gareth backed up one of his cell phones to the laptop and reset it to factory settings, but I'm not sure if this was just standard operating procedure for him, or if he was trying to erase potentially important data. We know that Gareth possessed another mobile phone, which showed that he had a history of browsing bondage websites, but investigators acknowledged that he didn't spend an overly unusual amount of time on them to indicate that he was obsessed with the subject. I mean, I'm sure that everyone has something in their browsing history which is going to cause people to make wrongful assumptions. And if Gareth had not been found dead under such bizarre circumstances and just simply died of cancer or something, no one would have raised an eyebrow over him browsing bondage websites. Personally, the one detail which I find unusual and doesn't get discussed nearly as much is the fact that he shot a video of himself dancing nude while wearing nothing but a pair of leather boots. And not only that, but the video was found on a cell phone which he was keeping in a locker at his workplace. Look, I would ordinarily say that something like this is Gareth's private business and we shouldn't be speculating on it, but generally, when people shoot videos of themselves doing sexual things like this, they do so with the intention of having someone else watch it. And as far as anyone can tell, Gareth has never been linked to any known sexual or romantic partners, male or female, and I'm not even sure if he was ever in a serious relationship in his lifetime. To delve further into his background, Gareth was considered to be a very gifted child who was far more interested in mathematics than social activities and developing close friendships. Like I mentioned earlier, even though he also developed a passion for cycling and joined a number of clubs, he was not the type of person who would go to hang out at the pub with his colleagues. While he was never officially diagnosed, a lot of people who knew Gareth have stated that they believed he was on the autism spectrum, which is why working as a cryptologist at GCHQ was an ideal job for him. But while GCHQ was known for being a workplace for introverts who like to sit at their desks studying coded communications, MI6 employed more extroverted people, and I think that was a major culture shock for Gareth and influenced his decision to return to his old position at GCHQ after only 1 year of his secondment. This is why I'm skeptical of the idea that Gareth was being recruited to be a spy or perform undercover work, because those jobs often require you to interact with people, and I'm not sure if he would have had much interest in that. Knowing what we do about Gareth's personality, recording a video of himself dancing nude on his cell phone would seem very out of character for him, unless he was planning to show it to someone he was interested in. There's also the matter of the large amount of women's clothing, high-heeled shoes, wigs, and makeup found in Gareth's flat. This seemed to suggest that Gareth may have had an interest in dressing in women's clothes, but most of the clothing was unworn and still in its original packaging, and no evidence has ever surfaced, such as photos, videos, or eyewitnesses, to indicate that Gareth ever dressed in these outfits. There was speculation that Gareth may have purchased this clothing with the intention of giving it to his sister Carrie or his female friends as gifts, but Gareth had been purchasing it over the course of 2 years, and £20,000 does seem like an awful lot of money to be spending on gifts. However, it did come out that Gareth had been taking some fashion design courses at Central St. Martin's, so perhaps he was simply collecting all this women's clothing and accessories because he had an interest in the topic. One of the more absurd theories in this case was pushed forward by Peter Falding, one of the experts who testified at the coroner's inquest about Gareth's ability to lock himself inside the holdall bag. Falding believes that Gareth may have possessed all this clothing because he wore it for undercover assignments in which he pretended to be a woman. But I do not find that scenario to be logical at all, because why wouldn't MI6, just send a female agent on an undercover assignment like that? I previously mentioned the theory which has been pushed forward that Gareth was murdered by Russian agents who were blackmailing him and threatening to expose secrets from his private life if he did not become a double agent for them. Now, I obviously have no knowledge of the background check Gareth went through before he was assigned to MI6, but I've heard numerous experts state that it's pretty much standard practice during the screening process for top secret positions to ask candidates personal questions about their sexuality or if they have any particular sexual fetishes or certain websites they like to frequent. If the candidate answers openly and honestly and is not involved in anything illegal or dangerous, the screeners are probably not going to care about their personal life. But if the candidate does not answer honestly, and a background check reveals that they like to visit websites about certain sexual fetishes, then this will raise major red flags, since it will show that they have issues with transparency, and they could potentially find themselves in a position to be compromised and susceptible to blackmail. For all we know, when Gareth underwent his background check, he may have already revealed that he was gay or liked to visit bondage websites or dress in women's clothing, which meant that foreign agents would not have had any leverage for potential blackmail. But on the other hand, Gareth did not tell anyone from MI6 that he was taking these fashion design courses, which would hardly qualify as a shameful secret to hide from your superiors. For all we know, perhaps Gareth was eventually hoping to leave the intelligence field and pursue fashion as a new career path, so the presence of all these women's accessories is nothing more than a red herring. One of the main reasons that investigators started leaning towards the possibility that Gareth's death was the result of a sex game gone wrong was the account from Gareth's former landlady, Jennifer Elliott, who claimed that she and her husband found Gareth with his arms tied to his bedposts while he was living in the rented room in Pressbury. Gareth was dressed only in boxer shorts at the time and claimed that he had tied himself into that position because he wanted to see if he could get free, but since he was unable to do so, he called for help. This incident took place 3 years before Gareth's death, and it sounds like an unusual anomaly during his time there, because Jennifer Elliott had nothing but glowing things to say about Gareth and described him as the perfect tenant, which is why she was going to allow him to move back in there when he returned to his old position at GCHQ. While there was no evidence that an outside party was in Gareth's room that night, part of me does wonder if he brought a partner in there who proceeded to tie him up and possibly even rob him before fleeing the scene, and Gareth was just too embarrassed to tell anyone about it. Of course, this is all just speculation, but I would be curious to know how Gareth managed to tie both of his arms to the bedposts on his own. If he managed to pull it off and was telling the truth about wanting to see if he could free himself, that could mean he had an interest in Harry Houdini-esque escapology. For all we know, over the course of the next 3 years, Gareth got himself into a number of other situations just like that which we don't even know about because he managed to escape. But when he attempted to challenge himself by locking himself inside a holdall bag with the hopes of escaping, it all went horribly wrong. Indeed, the fact that the padlock's key was found inside the bag beneath Gareth's body does suggest that he may have been planning to stick the key through some sort of opening in order to unlock himself. This seems to be supported by the fact that Gareth had abrasions on his elbows, as he may have attempted to maneuver his way around, and there were also scratches on the interior which may have been caused by Gareth attempting to use the key to cut himself loose. Regardless of whether Gareth did this to himself or there was an outside party involved, I do think he was likely alive and conscious when he first entered the bag. Now, everyone who knew Gareth said that he had a risk-averse personality, meaning that if he wanted to attempt something like this, he likely would have taken some sort of knife or cutting tool into the bag with him as a backup plan if he was unable to get out. But the counter to this argument is that if Gareth's decision was sexually motivated, perhaps the risk of this whole plan only added to the excitement. Well, it's been speculated that Gareth had an interest in claustrophilia, which is a fetish which involves deriving pleasure from being in a confined space. This has never been conclusively proven, so if Gareth decided to put himself into the bag, this could have been driven by his interest in escapology rather than anything sexual. I suppose you can't completely rule out the possibility that this was an elaborate suicide, but since Gareth had already made arrangements to complete his return to GCHQ by asking Jennifer Elliott if he could move back into his old room, there were no warning signs to suggest that he was planning to end his own life. And besides, intentionally locking yourself in a bag in order to die from suffocation and dehydration has to be one of the most horrible ways to kill yourself. But if Gareth's death truly was a tragic accident, was he there alone, or was someone else present? Well, no witnesses reported seeing anyone enter or leave Gareth's flat that night, and the last CCTV footage which was captured of Gareth showed him returning there alone several hours before his presumed death. All the other tenants who lived in that townhouse said that Gareth often kept the windows closed and the blinds down, so it was usually difficult for them to tell if he was there or not. If Gareth invited someone over, it may not have captured much attention, but we know there were no signs of forced entry, and the door was locked when police showed up and discovered Gareth's body. Gareth was known for keeping his flat very tidy, so some sources have alleged that it was cleaned so thoroughly that no DNA or fingerprints could be found, which could have pointed towards someone eradicating all evidence of an outside party's involvement in Gareth's death. However, this point is not entirely true, as traces of DNA and over 100 fingerprints were found throughout the flat, but it just wasn't strong enough evidence to prove that anyone else had complicity in what happened. Some of these DNA fragments could not be positively identified because the samples just weren't large enough to put together a full profile, but the recent forensic review performed on the evidence was unable to prove the involvement of a third party. And the presence of 100 fingerprints doesn't really prove anything, since this flat was occupied by other people prior to Gareth moving in, so the presence of someone's prints does not prove they were involved in his death. One of the most interesting pieces of evidence was the presence of Gareth's semen on the bathroom floor, which suggests that there may have been a sexual element to how he wound up in the holdall bag. But then again, if Gareth had a fetish for being in confined spaces, you would think that his semen would be found inside the bag rather than outside it. But it does make you wonder if someone else may have been present when Gareth experienced this sexual release in the bathroom. The most heavily debated topic of this whole case is whether Gareth would have even been physically capable of entering the bag, zipping it shut, and padlocking it on his own. I know that when the coroner's inquest was held in 2012, 2 experts testified that they made a combined total of around 400 attempts to seal themselves in the bag but were unable to pull it off. But then after the inquest took place, a video was recorded of 16-year-old Izzy Featherstonehaugh climbing into the bag and managing to seal it and close the padlock from the inside, showing that it was physically possible. Of course, the big issue is that Izzy was a teenage girl who was 3 inches shorter than Gareth, and she performed this experiment in an open room rather than within the confines of a bathtub. So just because she managed to pull it off under these circumstances does not necessarily mean that Gareth was capable of doing the same thing. However, another guy named David Winpenny later released a YouTube video of himself climbing into a holdall while it was inside a bathtub, and he was able to successfully lock himself inside. But did Gareth do the same thing? Given that he was an avid cyclist, Gareth was definitely in top physical shape, but does that mean he was flexible enough to lock himself into a holdall bag without assistance? The biggest piece of evidence against this possibility is the lack of DNA or fingerprints on the bag, the padlock, or the bathtub, as it would have been very difficult for Gareth to climb inside without touching all of these items. But there's also no guarantee that whenever you touch something, you're automatically going to leave your DNA or fingerprints on it, so that doesn't necessarily disprove the idea that Gareth would have been capable of doing this. The counter-argument to this whole situation is that if someone else placed Gareth in the bag, they would have left more fingerprints and DNA behind on the bag or the bathtub, but they also would have had the opportunity to thoroughly clean up all the physical evidence, something which Gareth obviously wouldn't have been able to do. However, two details which I don't think get discussed enough is that when police first arrived at the scene, the bathroom's lights were off and the bathtub shower screen was closed. Obviously, this meant there would have been a lot less space for Gareth to maneuver himself into the bag and increase the chances of him leaving his prints on something, and it would also be a lot more difficult for him to accomplish this if the entire room was dark. So does this suggest there was a third party who closed the shower screen and turned off the lights when Gareth was already in the bag before they exited the flat? The presence of the key in the bag underneath Gareth's body does not discount the involvement of someone else, as they would not require the key to close the lock. If this was really some sort of sex game or escape challenge gone wrong, this other person may have had no intention of killing Gareth, but was simply there to function as his backup in case Gareth was unable to free himself. But then something went horribly wrong, and Gareth died inside the bag, so the third party panicked and decided to flee without attempting to free Gareth or tell anyone about what happened. The one detail which makes me skeptical that Gareth was alone when he died is the fact that the heating in his flat was turned all the way up, even though it was August. The theory which has been pushed forward is that someone intentionally did this in hopes that the temperature would speed up decomposition and destroy potential evidence. If this was their intention, then it technically worked, because Gareth's exact cause of death could not be determined, and the decomposition may have covered up any injuries he received on his body. I honestly cannot think of any logical reason for Gareth to turn up the heating himself, unless this was an elaborate suicide, or confining himself inside a holdall bag in brutally hot temperatures was part of his fetish. We have a window of at least 7 days until Gareth's body was discovered, so if someone else was involved in his death, they would have had ample time to cover their tracks. I will say that when I first became familiar with this case many years ago, I was absolutely convinced that Gareth was the victim of foul play and that a major cover-up took place. But now that I've seen how sensationalized the reporting on this case was, it does seem less and less likely to me that Gareth was killed over something involving his work, and I'm skeptical of any conspiracy theories about him being killed by Russian agents. I certainly don't discount the possibility that Gareth may have been murdered for personal reasons, and his killer may have wanted to watch him suffer by slowly suffocating inside the bag, but if so, no one has ever popped up on the radar as a potential suspect. I know that for the past decade, the Metropolitan Police have been inclined to believe that Gareth entered the bag alone and there was no third party present, but if you believe that he was killed for reasons connected to national security and his work at MI6, it's so easy to assume that the police may have been ordered to reach this conclusion as part of a massive cover-up. Of course, the big dilemma for Gareth's family is that if he really did die alone, then how can they ever really know for sure? Even if this was not premeditated murder, and Gareth did die as the result of some sort of sex game or experiment gone wrong, the presence of a third party would mean there is at least someone out there who knows the full truth about how Gareth died and can provide definitive answers. There are countless cases in which a victim died by suicide or accidentally, and their loved ones were convinced it was foul play, but Gareth's death is so beyond the norm that I can understand how difficult it must be for his family. They have been forced to hear endless speculation about Gareth's private life and possible sexual fetishes, and from their point of view, I can understand why it would be preferable to believe the murder conspiracy theories. I'm sure it would be easier for them to think that Gareth died a hero in service to his country, rather than becoming the victim of a senseless tragic accident because he attempted some sort of sex game. As far as my opinion goes, I am inclined to think that Gareth's work had no relevance to his death, though I am still troubled by the fact that MI6 allowed him to miss so many days of work without taking any action, so I can't rule out the possibility that they know more than they're saying. But I am also not entirely convinced that Gareth was able to lock himself into the bag on his own, and that no one else was present when he died. Even if this wasn't an intentional murder, and no one meant to kill Gareth, there could still be someone out there who left him to die and knows exactly what happened. No matter how you look at it, I do not think there is any one theory which makes 100% complete sense and does not have at least some holes in it. But one of these days, I'd certainly love to know the full truth. So if by chance you happen to have any information about the unexplained death of Gareth Williams, please contact the London Metropolitan Police. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the past 6 years, our Patreon page has released nearly 80 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released a bonus episode about a very odd story from Unsolved Mysteries involving a young mute woman named Lucy who was discovered wandering the streets of California in 1992 with no information about who she was, and as far as I can tell, she was never identified. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and my two co-hosts, Jules and Ashley, cover an unsolved cold case from Massachusetts, the 1995 murder of Deanna Kremen. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have over 60 of these commentary tracks in our archives. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Tiago S., Stephanie D., and Juliana S. Thank you all so much for your support. I wanted to remind everyone that in just over 1 month from now, The Trail Went Cold will be appearing at the Berkshire Podcast Festival, which is taking place in North Adams, Massachusetts from October the 18th to the 20th. It's being organized by Josh Hallmark of the True Crime Bullshit podcast and will feature a number of high-profile shows, including yours truly. If you would like to purchase tickets, please visit their website at berkshirepodcastfestival.com and use our specialized promo code COLD2024 to get a 35% discount on tickets. That's berkshirepodcastfestival.com and use the promo code COLD2024 to get a 35% discount. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composed the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter or Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Anyway, I hope to see some of you at CrimeCon UK, but if not, have yourselves a great week and join us next Wednesday for another brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.